I did get a call this week. We're speaking with the Auditor General, and he said it would be perfectly fine to mention that those of us that have been waiting for an audit, that will probably be out within a month or so. So on that note, I had a question that another member had actually brought up, and that was that, do you have a reserve account that you would have published that's not in the information?
We have, of course, the game fund, which is in the information, and there also are, as was mentioned earlier in previous discussions in hearings, the escrow accounts.
But you don't have them pie charted?
No, they're not pie charted because they're not our money. So they're, like any other escrow you have for your house, it's not really your money. It's put in that account. So it's not part of our revenue. So that's why it's not pie charted. All
right. Well, I'm not going to spend any time on that because hopefully we will have some more definitive answers to that, and I appreciate that. A couple things I would say as a lifetime sportsman with respect to the work done and the things that I have supported with the Game Commission over the years, and glad to do so. I would be careful when we pick and choose certain reports. Our job is to obviously represent the people that are in our district and those that obviously are probably covered in almost every state that hunt or trap or are sportsmen. So I'm glad that we have this opportunity because many times what we do here influences the questions, challenges, what's going on, like controlled burns. When I first came here, you refused to do them. Glad to see they're being done. I mentioned that last time. So things like that you talked about, the surveys and such, is terrific. I mean, the reason I bring up the reports is that because some of us who talk nationwide and maybe hunt out of state and rub shoulders with avid sportsmen have different reports that they go by. And so that's why I bring up the caution to even using quality deer management as your go-to report, and because there's others that do not. So I have a question with respect to CWD, which, as some of us knew, that seemed like it was going to be coming, if not sooner than later. And so with some of the reports that have been going nationwide, one came out yesterday from Canada having to do with soil. I don't know if you saw that. Another one came out this week with respect to the questions that they have about the prions. You know that a press conference took place here. My concern has always been that we're at 50 plus years nationwide with no solution. So I would be a little bit more concerned with the fact that we take a position on something as if it's dogmatically wrong. However, we don't have an answer. So having said that, I know that there's sportsmen, once again, the private sector stepping up, trying to take an initiative to spend their hard-earned money for more study and hopefully more results. So I guess I have one specific question that when you go down through the list of things that we do know with respect to CWD, we do know nationwide that antler restriction is a problem. So I guess my question to you would be, does the agency, knowing that a point restriction exacerbates the problem and the spread of CWD, have any thought in removing that?
Actually, we have continued discussions on that, not because it hasn't been demonstrated that antler restrictions cause a problem, because when you look at dispersal, so when we have disease, the CWD in the deer, it's the young bucks that, the most dangerous because they disperse. The problem is they disperse while they're antlerless. They're not yet a buck. You don't see the antlers. So that's why, to this date, and you look at West Virginia, for example, they never had antler restrictions in that state, and it went through that population fairly well. However, we are, just because we've had antler restrictions, would we consider, and we are having discussions in certain areas, do we need to look at this as far as getting the population down in key areas where CWD is most prevalent? So we are actually addressing or looking at that. So, but to say that antler restrictions in itself spreads CWD, we can find no evidence. Now, some of the other states look at it a little differently. We got to go by what information, what data we have to make the best
Well,
decision.
and that's why I say there's always this conflict. However, we do know that multiple reports have come out. Even Missouri has reversed their antler restrictions, and one other state that I know of just recently. So the whole point was not so much the antler restriction, as you know, it's the age of deer. And so when a buck is more mature and the older they get, the more chance and prevalence there is for them to spread the disease. That's my only concern. I don't, look, in full disclosure, I actually hunted in Missouri this year and harvested a fantastic buck with my bow. And yes, they have CWD things in place, but I let probably 15 walk by before I chose the one that I felt satisfied with. Same thing I did in New York, but I let everything in Pennsylvania walk. So my whole point is, yes, there can be a personal decision that you can make. My only concern is that an agency, when they do know, if they ignore that, could be a bigger concern to me.
Well, to answer the question further, we're not ignoring it. In other words, we don't believe antler restrictions are a problem in the fact that, here's one thing, the number of CWD cases, the positive deer we get, it's pretty even as far as bucks and does. Number two, does can live a long time as well. All of us who hunt have shot 9, 10-year-old does, so they can spread that disease as well. But in certain areas of Pennsylvania, like DMA2, there is discussions right now about, do we relax the antler restrictions to help us lower the population? Because we know in other states where they've lowered the population, it has helped manage CWD. So there's a difference there. But I understand what you're saying, and there is disagreement amongst other scientists in other states over antler restrictions. But again, we go by what data we have, but we're not tied to it. We'll do whatever it takes to deal with this disease best we can. We know our hunters love antler restrictions, and so there is that factor. We weigh into that, but the health of the deer herd is far more important, and we do focus on that. So I hope that.
Right, and I think the health of the deer herd is the overall issue here, which is why I think some of those things play into it. And the whole debate that rose up recently with respect to prion versus bacteria may be something that we obviously can't ignore, because if we don't have a solution now, we can't ignore something that could be a possibility. So in that same vein, that was why I said that. And I know you're on the hot seat, and I'm going to close with this. I was very disappointed in the behavior, and you're somewhat familiar with this. But you came to my office with respect to wanting to make a better public relations with sportsmen, with legislators, and those. And when I was blessed enough to experience something in 2016, which was the triple play, I was very disappointed to have to put in a right to know to find out that individuals sitting in this room smeared me. We actually have house rules not to impugn another member, not to be so disrespectful. I don't know how we go forward if the agency has people within its upper office impugning or smearing somebody on their successes.